Oh, hey! How's it going, everybody? I'm Patrick from LSAT Lab. We're talking about one of the 7 frameworks, challenge position. Challenge position is actually the most common of the 7 frameworks. Let's take a sec to nurse our tiny coffee. Oh, that's tiny. And go through these 7 frameworks again. The first and most important is challenge position, which is where our author is criticizing some point of view. And so we got to figure out what's the opposing view and what's her criticism, or what is she selling instead. Highlight noteworthy feels like an informative article, and you're basically trying to figure out why does the author think it's noteworthy? Is it distinctive or impactful? Problem solution is where early on you hear a problem described, and then either the author is selling you a solution, or she's evaluating other people's solutions, or it's just a problem with no solution. Present debate involves at least 2 non-author points of view squabbling, and then the author might get involved and give you her take, or she might side with one of them. Old new is common in science. You're discussing something new and you want to know, how does the author feel about it? Does she trust it? What are its implications? Theme example is where you start with a general claim, but then the passage zooms into a specific example or series of examples to illuminate that claim. And answer a question is where there's sort of a causal mystery. What causes this thing? The punchline is the answer. Here's what we think is the causal explanation. So drink them all in, the 7 frameworks. The worst boy band that's ever been assembled. You guys look great. Okay, could everybody scram other than challenge position and present debate? I need you guys to wait after class and talk to me. Okay, actually I just need your signs. You guys can get going. Thank you. A lot of students will have trouble disambiguating between these two. The early clues are the same. You start with an attribution, somebody else's point of view. Social media is ruining kids. And then you're going to get a pivot and some pushback against that view. If the pushback comes from the author, then we would call it challenge position. That's oversimplifying what's going on. If the pushback comes from a non-author point of view, but some researchers at Yale say no, then that would be present debate. There are actually some weird times where you start with a point of view, an attribution, and then you're waiting for like, okay, who's gonna push back? You get non-author pushback, so you're like, okay, it's debate. But then you immediately get another pivot with the author pushing back against that pushback. And then you're like, so is it challenge debate position? It doesn't matter, there's more than one correct answer for what framework can work. So if you choose to emphasize the debate, then you're thinking 3 points of view, and the author seems to side with the first one. Whereas if you focused on the challenge position, you would just be thinking, okay, who is the author targeting, and what is the author criticizing or suggesting we should believe instead? The decision can be kind of arbitrary. It's really based on that first point of view. If it never shows up again, you might as well just call it challenge position. But if it shows up again, then maybe call it debate.
Hey, not too bad. It shows off my revenge body without screaming to the world, I'm the winner of this divorce.
There's 2 different styles of challenge position. One where the author just has concerns with a point of view. Like, the study's good, but I wish it had more info on this. Or there's certain assumptions I don't like about it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. However, I do think it would benefit from a hat.
And then there's a different style where the author's actually selling us some alternative idea. Like, people think Parker's writing novels, but no, it's folklore. People define property as X, no, it's really Y.
This outfit is a crime against fashion. Wear this instead.
Are you kidding me? Agnes is a fall complexion. You do not dress her in pink. Okay, there are these 2 different styles. Let's think about how challenge position will present in different topics. Humanities, the author's like defending an artist against criticism or clarifying a misconception about them. In law, they're normally challenging some interpretation or new school of thought. Society passages are where you see those like, I just have a gripe. I'm happy this new study exists, but I wish it would have blank. And then in science, it's not that common, but you would be sort of objecting to some sort of interpretation or causal explanation. Science is actually the least common here, only 11% of them, and law is also pretty rare for challenge position, whereas a fourth of humanities and society will be challenge position. All right, let's read a challenge position passage. Pay attention for that early attribution. That's your reminder to slam on the brakes and really process that first view and anticipate what the author's disagreement will sound like. Your framework fill-ins are what is the opposing view and what's the author's view. Is she making a complaint or selling us on some alternative idea? Pause the video and take a few minutes to read through this passage. Welcome back. Let's talk through some of the early moments of reading that passage. It starts with an attribution to our boy Chucky Darwin. And so that very first point of view, we want to slow down and be like, all right, there's a point of view saying that evolution is not just natural selection. You can predict that somebody disagreeing would be saying, yeah, it is. Evolution is just natural selection. The next sentence doesn't bring us a pivot yet. It's still another Darwin sentence, he declared. And then we get a sweet, sweet pivot. Ooh, nonetheless. So who's pushing back? Is it the author or non-author? Turns out it's non-author. It is these strict constructionists, and we can see the next three sentences are all in their point of view. And just as we predicted, their point of view is natural selection is all there is, baby. It explains everything. So at this stage, it feels very much like a present debate passage because we have two non-author points of view squabbling it out. At that point, you start reading for like, okay, well, will the next paragraph belong to Darwin or the strict constructionists? Probably won't hear from the author till the very end. The next paragraph starts confusingly with, it's generally held that natural selection results in adaptation. So that sounds like a common view, something that like everybody believes. Okay, and then the next sentence is saying, if the strict constructionists were right, so clearly they are not talking right now. It sounds like the author is talking. If they were right, then Y would follow. But in fact, so the author is using a classic rebuttal form that we see in LR called like faulty implications of logic, where you prove somebody's wrong by saying, well, if they were correct about X, then Y would also be true. And then by contrapositive, we're saying, but Y isn't true, so they must be wrong about X. So at the end of this second paragraph, we realize our author is here to say, strict constructionists, you guys are wrong. And when we glance ahead, we can see that the next paragraph has like a for example and additionally, which means that we're just supporting the thing the author said at the end of the second paragraph. You guys are wrong. You strict constructionists are wrong. So it's dealer's choice whether you want to call it challenged position and just focus on strict constructionists versus author. They say natural selection is all there is. The author is saying there's a lot of examples of things that are not caused by natural selection. Or we could think of it as present debate and rope in Darwin. But as we discussed before, since Darwin never comes back into play in the passage, we never hear from him again, it would probably be simpler to just focus on the idea that our author seems to be writing this to shoot down the strict constructionists. So for today's purposes, we're just going to call it challenged position. When you look at the voices in the passage, we start with that Darwin voice. We pivot into the strict constructionist voice. We have that ambiguous, everybody believes this, it's generally held sentence. And then once you hit the end of the second paragraph, it's all author from there on. So our final framework with the fill-ins, the opposing view is that natural selection explains everything. The author's view is no, it doesn't. There's a lot of stuff that isn't a result of natural selection. Now that's always the minimum. You know, our minimum when we do a big picture read is I gotta come away having those framework fill-ins internalized where I can say them conversationally to a sixth grader from memory. If we can remember how the author supported her case, like, you know, a couple of the like intermediate conclusions, that's even better. It's very useful to see that the author thesis sentence at the end of the second paragraph is split up into two ideas. The first idea is the idea that a lot of adaptations or a lot of attributes aren't the result of like it being an adaptation to your environment. And we cover that through the beginning of the third paragraph. And then the second point the author's making is that there's also just an element of luck and chance in terms of whether a species survives or goes extinct. And the author covers that with the back end of the last paragraph. All right, let's try some questions. Take a sec to pause the video and attempt this question. Welcome back. When we see we're doing main point and we're thinking, should I do some research? Should I get a pre-phrase out of my gut? The research would be if we have a most valuable sentence. And as we talked about, we would pick the last sentence of the second paragraph. If you want to get the opposing view in there as well, then sort of picking the second and third sentences of that paragraph would be a good idea. But the blue is what we really need because that's the author. So we would want our answer to sound something like, the strict constructionists are wrong because a lot of attributes aren't adaptations, and because success-failure often has nothing to do with adaptation. When we read answer choices, especially long ones, you try to go right to the main clause, the subject verb, to see, like, is this saying strict constructionists are wrong? A is saying evidence undermines their claim. I would keep that. B is saying, according to them. Well, I don't want an answer that quotes them. I need the author saying they're wrong. You could potentially start an answer like, according to strict constructionists, X is true, but that's not right. But this answer doesn't do that. It just quotes them. So this is off the table. It doesn't have the author's view at all. C starts with new evidence, which I just don't remember us ever talking about anything new, but I got to research that qualm. Was there something new? It looks like we say we now know, so that does suggest there's some recent evidence. Can't disqualify it for that. The main idea here is that, hey, natural selection can do non-adaptive things also. That does kind of feel like it's pushing back against the strict constructionist view, so we could keep it on a first pass. D has the same problem as B. It is just quoting the opposing view. It never gives any author a pushback. So we know this can't be right. It doesn't have the author saying they're wrong. E also starts out a little surprising. Evidence from population genetics. I don't remember stressing that concept. But again, if we research our qualms, we go, oh, okay, it is in there. And the gist of this idea is this evidence helps to disprove a certain claim. And that does seem along the lines of what we want, like helps to show that these strict constructionists are wrong, to say that it's all about natural selection. If we were focusing on challenge position and saying, all right, this answer better have some challenge position vibes, that would be A and E. We're saying something undermines this claim or helps to disprove this claim. So I would start by vetting A and E and seeing if they work. Let's remind ourselves what the actual claim is. The original claim is that natural selection explains everything, all attributes, their success or failure of every species. And how do A and E describe the position? A is saying that natural selection is the only driving force. I feel like that's a pretty decent match for the first paragraph. Whereas E says that it results in the fittest species. Doesn't actually say anything in the passage about whether it results in the fittest species. That's kind of a common outside knowledge slogan relating to evolution, but it's not something that we're seeing in the passage. So E seems to just be distorting what the strict constructionists actually claimed. That leaves us with A and C. C was saying that with our new evidence, we now know that natural selection can result in non-adaptive or adaptive changes. Well, again, if we do a little rereading, natural selection by definition means it's adaptive. Darwin is saying not every trait is naturally selected. Some of them are non-adaptive. So C is almost self-contradictory because if it's naturally selected for, by definition, it was adaptive. Even if we looked past that, C would be too narrow because it wouldn't bring in the second objection the author had about the success or failure being often a result of random factors like an asteroid rather than genuine adaptations to an environment. All right, so it looks like A is our best contender. We just got to make peace with the idea of two areas of science. Well, the first chunk comes from population genetics, and the second one comes from paleontology. So I guess there were two different areas of science. Sign me up for a hefty slice of choice A. All right, let's work on this next question together. When we see the question stem, we identify it as author opinion because it's talking about the author most likely to agree, but it has an undefined target because it didn't give us any keywords like agree about what. So it's just encompassing the entire passage. We're always asking ourselves, should I go research something in the passage before I look at the answers? Should I ask my gut to make a prediction? Or should I just head straight to the answers? And this one is lending itself usually to just head straight to the answers. You don't know where to look. Unless there was an author zone, meaning if there was one part of the passage where that was where the author's voice really came through, you might reread that portion one more time. But in this passage, the whole third paragraph and the end of the second paragraph were the author, so that would be a lot to reread. The other way we can attack it is we go answers first, and we focus on the strength of the claim being made in each answer choice, so that we can just find the ones that make more moderate claims. They're more likely to be correct. You're asking yourself, what's the burden of proof to try to prove one of these answers? When it comes to choice A, it's saying natural selection is responsible for almost none of existing species characteristics. So you would have to look at every characteristic of every species and decide that at least 90% of them have nothing to do with natural selection. B actually has incredibly alluring language. Saying that one thing is not proof of another is really weak. Going to Yale is not proof that you're smart. You just need one counterexample where someone goes to Yale but you don't think they're smart. So the burden of proof here is just one case where a species flourishes, but they're not adapted to that environment. C is coming in hot. It's saying that only changes that provide an advantage get transmitted. So we would have to look at every single evolutionary change and make sure that 100% of them provided an advantage. Who would want to commit themselves to that claim? Our author's probably not going to agree to that. D is making a generalization about all large animal species. So we would need to look at all of them, all large animal species, and verify that more than 50% of them are unable to adapt to harsh conditions. And then E is saying that natural selection is useful for this, but not that, when it comes to most species. Most is such a scary word in reading comp because the burden of proof sucks. You have to look at all of them and then make sure at least 50% of them have that trait. And the expression, it's useful for this, but not that, means that for the second category, it is useless. We'd have to look at every species and make sure that in more than 50% of cases, natural selection is useless for explaining something. It's not always this dramatic. Right now, B is an obvious leading contender. The burden of proof for B is so much lower than the other four answers. But you often get something resembling this, where a couple answers are just really, really strong claims. So the idea of using strength of language is that it helps you set priorities. Which answer do I want to research first? And which answers would be the last on my list to research? Because we usually don't have enough time to research all five. So you're trying to prioritize how to allocate your time. The third gear you can sometimes think of when you're doing undefined author opinion is that a lot of times the correct answer does feel sort of main point adjacent. So you can remind yourself of the main point. The author doesn't think that natural selection explains everything. She's saying there's a lot of traits that species have that were just kind of neutral mutations. And then she said a lot of species also survive or perish based on really dumb, unrelated factors that have nothing to do with adaptation. So putting all these things together, you start by researching B because it's got the weakest language. You see that it's saying, hey, the fact that a species flourishes doesn't prove it's adapted. It doesn't prove it's naturally selected. And you're like, that's kind of main point adjacent. That is the author saying, not everything is explained by natural selection. The fact that a species is flourishing doesn't prove that it's naturally selected. We could certainly justify it in the text, either by using our most valuable sentence or by using the dinosaur example in the last paragraph. So B is our correct answer. Let's take a look at those wrong answers. We were nervous with A about almost none, and that is too strong. Our author was rebutting and saying, whoa, natural selection doesn't explain everything. There's numerous examples of things not explained by natural selection. But A is way stronger. It's saying natural selection explains almost nothing. So that goes way beyond what the author said. The strong language in C is actually being contradicted. we are told that a lot of evolutionary changes are neutral, non-adaptive. So it's totally wrong to say that only the adaptive ones are transmitted to subsequent generations. D is trying to go from a comparative to an absolute. We heard that large animal species are less able to survive catastrophic changes, but that doesn't mean they're generally not able, right? Like Bill Gates has less money than Elon Musk, but that doesn't mean he has no money or that he's poor. So we got to watch out for these shifts between relative ideas and absolute ideas. With E, we talked about form versus behavior, which was actually in a sentence at the beginning of the second paragraph, but they're being grouped together there. It's talking about the form and behavior. And so this answer is trying to create a distinction where there never was one. They're just kind of taking two concepts that were mentioned collectively and now making them fight each other or making an unbalanced comparison between them. So once again, B is our answer. Soft wording, main point adjacent. You gotta love it. All right, next up is author attitude. They want to know the author's attitude about the strict constructionists. Our first question on attitude is just asking our brain, well, was it positive or negative? And obviously it was negative. We're doing challenge position. But if we were trying to prove it in the text, we would say, the author said, if they were right, X would follow, but in fact, that doesn't follow. When we look at answers, we focus on the noun, not the adjective, because the noun is what sets the core idea of whether overall it's positive or negative. So we can get rid of C, D, and E very quickly because none of them are negative. Neutral, agreement, and endorsement are not going to fly. To assess whether it's mild or emphatic negative, we kind of just have to look at the concessions and the strength of language. The strict constructionist view is that natural selection explains everything. So if you are disagreeing with that, you're just saying it doesn't explain everything. There's at least some things it doesn't explain. And the concessions could be like, yes, it explains a lot. That might feel sort of like we are only mildly disapproving, but we're literally refuting a conditional statement. So A is the correct answer. It's just too weak to say mild disapproval when the whole passage is written to falsify what the strict constructionists are claiming. This next question is paragraph purpose. The answers on paragraph purpose often come in two different styles. They either sort of name abstract connections of like how this paragraph relates to other ones, or they get into like the specific content of that paragraph, like what was the main point of this paragraph. You can usually tell by glancing at the answers which style it is, and in this case it's both. All 5 answers have like specific references to the topic of evolution, strict constructionists, but all 5 also have some reference to another paragraph as well, like how it connects to nearby parts. When we're prephrasing paragraph purpose, we try to use our framework as sort of the vocabulary for talking about it. So how would we describe paragraph 2 using like challenge position vocabulary? We knew that first sentence was kind of neutral. It applied to every point of view. Then the second one was like, well, if the enemy were correct, this would be true. And then we had a pivot from our author saying, but it's not true, implying, so they're wrong. All right, go ahead and pause the video, take a look at your 5 choices, and see which one you like. Welcome back. This ends up being a really tough question because of how bad the answer choices get. We just want something like, it's where we find out that the author disagrees with strict constructionists, right? That's the big picture of what this paragraph does. And then the last couple paragraphs are where the author sort of like fleshes out her disagreement. A actually doesn't involve the author. It just says it's where we hear what strict constructionists don't like about traditional evolutionary theory. I don't even know what to match that up with. Did they have any objections to traditional evolutionary theory? Not really. In fact, they love it so much, they're overdoing it. They're like, we love natural selection so much, we think it explains everything. So they don't have any objections. We can get rid of A for that. B says it lists recent evidence. There's no recent evidence in paragraph 2 at all. The back end of B looks good because yes, we are going to ultimately show that the strict constructionists are incorrect, but there's nothing in the content of paragraph 2 that would match up with recent evidence. The first half of C feels fine. It does describe their view of evolutionary theory in the second sentence. But in order to explain why it's gotten so much attention, in the first paragraph, they did talk about the idea that it's recently been getting some attention. But that doesn't follow through into the second paragraph. There's no causal explanation about like, oh, this is why it's getting a lot of attention. And it would also just be like too neutral. Like, we need to hear the author shows up in paragraph 2 and says, you guys are wrong. And so C is wrong for a couple of reasons. D ends up being the very, very tricky trap answer because it kind of looks like what we wanted. You know, we hear about the strict constructionist view and then our author says, yo, I'm going to rebut that. But according to D, it gets rebutted in the paragraphs that follow. I mean, that is true. Paragraph 3 and 4 are a rebuttal, but the author does show up in paragraph 2 to rebut it. So what D is really describing is common in like a debate passage or a challenge position passage, where like an entire paragraph outlines one view, and then the next paragraph switches to a new view. We did not have that here. We didn't enumerate arguments. To enumerate arguments is like, here's the first thing they believe, here's the second thing they believe, here's the third thing. We literally have one sentence for strict constructionists in this paragraph. So you cannot say that we enumerated any arguments. And then it's a little weird to make it seem like the author's rebuttal doesn't show up until later paragraphs, because it shows up at the end of the second paragraph. And that leaves us with turd ball E. What in God's name are you saying, E, and what corner of hell did you come from? So it explains the ramifications of their claim. Let's pause there. What is a ramification of a claim? Well, it's basically like the outcome of an if-then conditional. When we say if they were right, X would follow, X could be described as a ramification, an entailment, a consequence, an implication. And you may know in logical reasoning on method questions, there's a very common pattern we call faulty implications of logic, where you prove somebody wrong by saying, if they were correct, then this implication, this ramification would follow. But since it doesn't follow, clearly they're wrong. So we can go along with the first half of E. It does mention the ramification. That would mean that every attribute and the survival of every species would be caused by natural selection. What we would love to hear on the back end of E is, and then the author says, but yo, that ain't true. But instead we get, it helps to explain the relevance of the evidence offered elsewhere. Clarifying the relevance, I guess, means that like the thesis sentence at the end of paragraph 2, this for example and additionally are tying back to that last sentence. The author is rebutting the strict constructionists, and the evidence in following paragraphs is relevant to that claim because it's sort of supporting those 2 points. As we said before, the first claim is about whether or not attributes are always adaptations. The author spends some time shooting that down. Second claim is about whether success-failure is always about adaptation, and the author spends some time shooting that down. So this is just an insane way of describing the thesis sentence, the third sentence of the second paragraph. The thesis does help explain the relevance of everything else. So E is the best available answer. They went out of their way to say the function of the second paragraph in a stupid way, but there's nothing broken about E, other than the soul of whoever wrote that answer choice. That person is broken in a way that we can't fix. But the other 4 answers had problems we could say are deal breakers. And E, we can charitably read in a way where we say, yeah, I guess that's technically an accurate sentence. That answer choice is so bad, I feel like it deserves a palate cleanser. So enjoy this little scene.
Hey, I just finished a yoga class and it was such a blast. You should totally join me next time.
Really? What's so special about it?
Well, the instructor is a bit eccentric. She has this unique way of making the class super engaging. Last week, she introduced this challenge position that most of us struggled with.
Challenge position? What's that?
Oh, it's this advanced pose that requires a lot of balance and strength. So what do you think? Join me next Tuesday?
That sounds intense. Did you manage to do it?
Not at all. I fell over a couple of times, but that's part of the fun. The instructor encourages us to just laugh it off and try again. It's all about growth.
Wow, sign me up for this challenge position. Oh my gosh, what's that over there?
Over where?
Welcome back from that pointless detour. Now let's finish this off with a primary purpose question. When we do primary purpose, our pre-phrase is the framework. I know the primary purpose. We were trying to challenge the position of the strict constructionists. As you evaluate these answer choices, keep thinking like, I really want it to feel like challenge position. Pause the video and decide on your favorite. C and D look the most like challenge a position because we're demonstrating a view is incorrect or criticizing some proponents. Okay, well, we were criticizing the strict constructionists, and they are a recent view. They're not a traditional view. The traditional would probably be Darwin. We're not criticizing Darwin. So D is off the table. Are we demonstrating a view is incorrect? That verb demonstrate is pretty strong, but we actually did have a pretty formal logic takedown here. We said if they were right, X would follow, but X doesn't follow, therefore they are wrong. And we provided, two chunks of supporting text. So yeah, we kind of demonstrated that the strict constructionist view is incorrect. C looks good top to bottom. We're picking it. In terms of the other answers, A talks about a recent hypothesis. And again, the recent thing is the strict constructionists. We're not arguing in favor, we're arguing against them. So A is the opposite of what we want. B feels too neutral because the verb summarize just sounds like the author presented a debate but never weighed in on it herself. And we know that this author weighed in and said, strict constructionists are wrong. So that's too neutral. Finally, E makes it sound like the framework was answer a question, like a causal explanation. And was our author trying to explain why this strict constructionist view is gaining popularity? Not at all. The author mentions that it's gained prominence or popularity recently, just as a throwaway comment in the third sentence. She never explains why it's been popular, and the bulk of the passage is about rejecting the validity of the view, not explaining why it's popular. We selected out the questions of that passage that relate more to the big picture to show you how the framework of challenge position kind of gets embodied in these correct answers. But let's just keep in context that there are other questions on this passage that just dive in asking us specific little tiny moments of detail that aren't necessarily going to be something you can answer based on the framework. All right, let's try one more passage before we go. Again, think about the early attribution, the pivot, the pushback. Pause the video and give this passage a read. This passage, just like the last one, starts with an attribution that some critics say blank. And then the next sentence is saying central to this critique. So, voicing the same view is this dude Marcuse. The third sentence, it's kind of hard to tell, is that the author talking or is that just the author describing Marcuse's point of view? Sometimes it can be tricky to decide when the author is just elaborating on someone else's position or kind of agreeing with it at the same time. So at this point, we would still think, all right, well, it's not a pivot. If anything, that's probably still Marcuse. And then the second paragraph starts off once again, still talking about Marcuse. You get a couple other sentences that have that generic opening where you're like, okay, is the author saying this or is the author telling me this is what Marcuse would say? I would generally err on that side, that until you really feel the author do a pivot or an opinion, a lot of times they're just presenting somebody else's case. So it's not until the third paragraph that we get a genuine author pivot, unfortunately, and then the pushback. This is extremely problematic. And from there on, we can tell our author is challenging a position. We actually see the same structure as last time. If the strict constructionists were right, then X would follow. They're doing that same faulty implication setup, but that thing doesn't follow, so they must be wrong. And that's what we get in the fourth paragraph. In fact, again, it's but in fact. I think we had the exact same wording on the last passage. But in fact, there's numerous examples of attributes and extinctions that have nothing to do with natural selection. We also in this passage see supporting indicators, like for example, additionally, last time we see a moreover telling us that our author is still building the case against Marcusians. Another similarity is we have the whole concession pivot structure at the end. It's like, now they would be right insofar as X, but they're wrong insofar as Y. So those are the big signposts that would stick out to us that make us think it's challenged position. You basically have a view in the first two paragraphs, and then the author pivots in the third paragraph, and the rest of the passage is essentially the author disagreeing with that original position. So now we just have to make sure we own those two positions. What's the opposing view? What's the author's view? The Marcusians are saying that advertising has brainwashed us. They take a real need, like the need for love, and pair it up with a fake need, like the need for a cheeseburger. And then we try to buy these products as a way to attain genuine fulfillment. Our author is saying, well, first of all, you think there's like real needs versus false needs, but you guys are also brainwashed by advertising. We're all living in the same virtual reality, so how would we know real from fake? More importantly, though, the author is saying, I don't think consumers are suckers. We look at the commercial, but we don't actually think that the cheeseburger will give us love. We just want a cheeseburger. So in this passage, you actually see both styles of challenge position. The first part is really like the author complaining about their logic. Like, the argument you guys are making is kind of self-defeating because y'all would never know the difference between real and false. You're just as brainwashed as the rest of us. But then at the end, the author's really selling us on an alternate view. It's not the case that people are being duped by advertising. We are clear-headed, we know that they are selling us lies, and we know that what we're getting from a product isn't going to be that full experience that they're selling us. All right, let's head to the questions. The first one, as we might expect, is main point. Let's pre-game this one together, and then you'll take a look at the answers on your own. When you pre-game main point, you're often trying to construct a sentence that combines the topic of the passage with the purpose or the framework. So we know the topic here is this Marcusian critique of advertising, and the framework was challenge position. So we want a sentence that is talking about the Marcusian ideas about advertising, but is conveying the idea that the author disagrees. So our prephrase could literally be, the Marcusian ideas about advertising are dumb. That's functionally good. Another thing we sometimes do from sort of a research point of view is we ask ourselves, like, was there a most valuable sentence somewhere in this passage, a sentence or two that I could go back to that feel like they kind of capture the author's main point? So we could extend our main point prephrase by sort of saying, the Marcusian point of view is dumb because it relies on a problematic distinction and because people aren't as gullible as you think. Go ahead and pause the video, check out the answers, and unpause when you've got your pick. Advertising has greater social value. I mean, that's saying the Marcusians are wrong, but the author was never making that sort of comparison, that it has more social value than they think. B looks like a very subtle disagreement. It's like, okay, even if there's a theoretical difference between real and false, in practice it's obscured. That's too agreeable, but it's also only focused at one of the author's two objections, so it's also too narrow. C looks like a great main clause. Their arguments about advertising are wrong. D's main clause is broader than Marcusian's. It's about all critics of advertising. It's the only one of the four answers that doesn't specifically call out the main topic of Marcusian's. E also sounds like a good main clause. Their problematic distinction provides a bad basis for attacking advertising. Now that we know both main clauses have that good challenge position vibe, we want to check on the actual supporting reasons each answer is given. C is saying one of the reasons they're wrong is because individuals can make autonomous decisions, which matches up really good with one of our two most valuable sentences, and because people could actually use products to achieve fulfillment. There was language like that at the end of the fourth paragraph. With E, we're saying that the distinction is overlooking physical and psychological needs, but it's not. When we check the text, Marcuse thinks we have real physical and real psychological needs. So, looks like we can settle on answer choice C. B and D we got rid of because they just don't give us that good framework of Marcusians are wrong. A and E have the wrong complaint, It's not because it has more social value than they think, or because they're overlooking the distinction between physical needs and psychological needs. As you go out into the world to work on challenge position, remember the idea that if that first sentence or two has an attribution, you should immediately start suspecting it's challenge position or present debate. If we get a pivot and pushback from the author, it's challenge position. And take the time at that point to really let the two different ideas sink in. What was the original view? And then what's the author's view? Is she complaining about something, or is she actually selling you on a different idea instead? Until next time, happy practicing.